We've reached a place in the global pandemic where movie studios are having to make the decision of how they're going to distribute their films. For instance, the new Christopher Nolan movie Tenet is still holding out hope for a wide theater release, while today's movie, Spike Lee's The Five Bloods, has now been released on Netflix. Originally planned for a premiere at the 2020 Cannes Film Festival and a limited theater release, The Five Bloods tells the story of a group of 5 aging Vietnam veterans who returned to Vietnam searching for buried treasure. I'm Ronald Young Jr., and I'm on the couch. All right, this is Ronald, and I'm on the couch after watching The Five Bloods. The Five Bloods, directed by Spike Lee, written by Danny Bilson, Paul DeMeo, Spike Lee, and Kevin Willmott, starring Delroy Lindo, Jonathan Majors, Clarke Peters, Norm Lewis, Isaiah Whitlock Jr., Melanie Thierry, Paul Walter Hauser, Jasper Paakkonen, Reno, and Chadwick Boseman. All right, so The Five Bloods, it's a movie about 4 black men who are Vietnam veterans who return to Vietnam to find a stash of buried gold. And they do this under the guise of finding the remains of their 5th friend. So, and you find that all out early into the movie. This isn't, nothing I'm saying is spoiler. That being said, it's a Spike Lee film, and it's very much a Spike Lee film. And I was interested in watching it because, I'd heard a couple people say that it was pretty good. And I'm not a big fan of Spike Lee movies. I feel like he tends to be a bit heavy-handed with his messages. There's no subtlety to them at all. There's typically no nuance. That's also not really, and that's also the case in this movie. But I liked this movie. I found myself watching it and being interested and being like, all right, okay, keep going. And, every time that I thought it was, drifting in a direction I didn't like, he would just do something to pull me right back in. And which is crazy because this is a 2.5 hour long movie. It's 2 hours and 35 minutes. And I think it probably could have ran a little shorter. I think they probably could have cut at least, I would say 20 to 25 minutes out of this movie easily and made it just a little bit over 2 hours. 2 hours and 35 minutes. You start to feel it a few times in there. But for the most part, a fantastic movie. I enjoyed it. I thought the acting was great. I thought the interactions that the cast had with each other. Delroy Lindo does a lot of the heavy lifting in this. I don't know quite if this is his Oscar run. He's award nominated several times. I think he has forgot the name of the award that he has, but he's been nominated for Tonys. He's been in the game for a long time. So I wouldn't be surprised if this was something that got him nominated, because he did a lot in this movie. But, a lot of it was the Spike Lee talking directly to the camera type thing and wild emotional swings, things like that. And it was good. It was good to watch. And I think the stuff that had to do with him just being stuck in the mire of PTSD and being angry about it, and being just a stubborn, frustrated older man. No, he's an old man, being a stubborn, frustrated old man. I think all of that came across in the acting. I think one thing this movie does really well is depict like the old black man trope in a way that it didn't feel like a trope. It just felt like as soon as they, like early on in the movie, they start meeting up with each other and they start dapping each other up in a very specific way. And I'm like, man, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, man, I'm having all the old black man flashbacks, like your whole life. You go to the barbershop, you go to church, anywhere, like, and I'm sure there's people that in fraternities, you go to old events, whatever, you just see them greet each other and you see it. You're like, wow, they in their mind, they flash back to the young men they once were, and you can see them like, yeah, watch out there now, all that. And there's a lot of that good natured teasing, all of that stuff that happens like in rapid succession. They capture a lot of that early on. But what they really capture, especially with the lead character played by Delroy Lindo with Paul, they capture this frustrated sense that older black men have in this country, this idea that I am owed something as well, which is a fair assessment because you're dealing with people who faced the racism of the nation, as well as having fought for the nation, and well as in some cases even loving the nation as much as anybody else does, loving the United States as much as anybody else does. And that's really a lot of what Spike Lee is trying to capture here, is the idea of these black men who fought for their country in the Vietnam War, which is our least popular of all wars. It's like the war that we don't really talk about, in our least popular of all these wars he talks about. And then it's these black men that fight for it and come back to a country that doesn't appreciate what they did, and they're still treated horribly after they get back. And there's a few monologues that express explicitly that. And when I say that, they basically hammer it home by just saying those words on camera, whether it be through flashbacks. So the fifth blood is played by Chadwick Boseman. And there's a few times in which he is stating things while they're in the Vietnam War, any of the Vietnam War scenes. He's stating things that about blackness in this country that I think Spike Lee is trying to get off his chest. And when I talk about the heavy-handedness or the lack of nuance, those are the kind of the instances where I'm talking about, where they kind of just, instead of showing us, they just almost stop the movie and say, we're going to state this to you right now, which again, that is a method, but I feel like it still is it's almost like I can expect that from Spike Lee. I feel like Spike Lee is very much being the guy who's like telling us about blackness and telling us about what black folks have done for this country. And he's not really like depicting it in a way that assumes that we have any agency, or that even assumes that maybe we know, or maybe we understand, or maybe you can, provide a little more nuance rather than like hammering it into our heads. So, and I think that's what's always made me disconnect from these movies. That's why I wasn't a huge fan of BlacKkKlansman, which I know a lot of people were, and I know it won awards, but was not one of my favorite movies. But I think this movie was different in that the action and the actual plot of the movie and the performances all drew me in a way that I'm like, the heavy-handedness and all that didn't. Because when someone's telling you something you already know, if they tell you something, and I've had I've had this several times, it's like being mansplained to, I'm sure. Or in generally, when somebody just tells you something you already know, it's just like, all right, I don't want to sit through you telling me this. I get it. Like, you're preaching to the choir. Please stop. Like, okay, we get it. We're on we're on the same court. There's times when they say it in a way, when someone tells you something you already know, but they say it in a way you've never heard. And that makes you go, oh, man, I didn't even think about that. And I think some parts of this movie did that, but with Spike Lee, he starts this movie with montages of blackness and civil rights and war. And which is something that he often does with his movies, which is connects you to reality. And to me, it's almost like somebody who explains the joke, or says, like, when you say when you say a joke and we all laugh, and then somebody goes, oh, that's because something. It's like, no, we get it. We get the joke. You don't have to tell me what the joke is. Now, I said all that, and I'm still telling you, I like this movie. So hopefully there's not people being like, I don't need anyone to explain to me why, he needs to explain it to me. Please don't do that to me. Please do not get in the comments or call me or text me and say that. All I'm trying to say is that, like, watching this movie, it's an enjoyable experience, and I don't necessarily need those parts explained to me. But that being said, I'm telling you that performances were good. I thought the plot was good. There's a bunch of plot twists. They were all like, I thought a few times, I was like, all right, this is about to take me out the movie. Did not. And as it continues, like, when I watch any movie, I always watch it in my mind with 3 stars. I always watch every movie in my mind saying, this is a 3-star movie. Whether it did anything or not, it's a 3-star movie. And then as I watch it, it goes up or down. This movie, I think in my mind wanted to make it a 4-star movie because I want to like it. but it didn't quite get there for me. There were some things that, still and all the stuff I explained about Spike Lee kind of held it back a little bit for me as well. But other than that, the plot itself is it's well executed. It's a well executed plot. By the time you get to the end, you're like, wow, this is a good movie. And they've made a Vietnam movie for black folks. They made a war movie for black folks. Like, we don't get very many of those. I'm thinking of one and I'm forgetting the name of it. And I think that was also done by Spike Lee. I think it was Miracle at St. Anna. And I think that was also done by Spike Lee, which is, he's been critical of Clint Eastwood and his take on war films because they don't involve black people. But here we are with something here we are with a movie that like features black folks about their perspective on American wars, because we're as American as everyone else. So I think watching it was just, I don't know, it felt different and new in a way that I appreciated. Now, there was a couple things, I had a thought I was going somewhere else. Now, let me just say this, sitting here watching it on the couch, I think I think that gave it a bump. I enjoyed sitting here. I enjoyed being able to play it, pause it whenever. It runs long, 2 hours and 35 minutes. But, like I said, you feel it a few times, but not so much that I felt like I had to take a break or anything. It was just like, all right, come on, let's get it going. And typically at those points they would, it's almost like they heard my thoughts and they immediately started picking up the plot again. So being able to watch it on Netflix, I think, was to its advantage. And I think that's a place that the movie benefits. Other than that, I would recommend it. I would tell you, if you had a minute, I would watch it. There's a lot of grisly scenes. And it's funny. It says that as it comes on, it says rated R and it says grisly images, and grisly is the right word. There's a few times in here where I'm just like, oh, I don't know if I needed to see, I don't know if I needed to see that, or I don't like, and it's like war violence. So, and then in another case, and it really is. It's just war violence, because even in the modern day scenes, the types of violence that's happening isn't really like stylized, isn't really like, like hacksaw or slasher or horror movie. It's just really like war violence. All of it is like the horrors of the type of things that happen during war. But it's not probably the most I've ever seen in a war film. There's one scene in particular, and you'll know it when you see it. That's probably the most grisly scene in the movie. You'll know it when you see it. And I won't say anything else than that, but when you get there, just know that everything else is well below that. So that should be fairly easy for folks to take who've seen movies like this. The one thing I want to say before I stop talking is that one thing I did know, I was sitting here and watching this movie and I was like, wow, this type of movie, and I was like, I'm surprised that they made this, because I'm like, it seems like if this movie was made anytime before 2020, this would have been the same movie, but not with black people. It would have been all white people going back to Vietnam, doing all that same movie, but with all white people. Then as I'm reading about the movie, I realized that there's 4 writers on this movie, and I called out all their names in the beginning. The writers are Danny Bilson, Paul DeMeo, Spike Lee, and Kevin Willmott. Well, Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo did write this movie originally, and they wrote it with white folks in mind. And I was like, I knew it. Then Spike Lee and his frequent collaborator, Kevin Willmott, came together, and they basically, I think they bought the rights or worked with it and made it about black folks, which I was like, great. And I think that made me appreciate the movie just a little bit more, because I was like, I really like that, because the truth is you can do this type of inclusive filmmaking if you think about it, because of course this movie could be about black folks. Of course there were black folks in the Vietnam War. Why couldn't this be about black folks and have all of the same beats? And if you watch it, you'll see what I'm talking about when I say all of the same beats. There's basically nothing really that you have to switch except for the perspective on the war and the different types of effects that it has on these particular individuals versus if they were white. So I thought that was clever, and I thought that was very well done. I liked it. I wouldn't say I loved it, but I liked it. I think I would give it 3.5 of 5 stars. I feel comfortable with that rating. Well above liked, lower than loved, but I think I would definitely recommend it to folks. I think it's good. So yeah. And with that, Leaving the Theater is a production of ohitsBigRon Studios. Theme music by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. To find out more about this show and other ohitsBigRon Studios shows, follow me on Twitter and Instagram @ohitsBigRon. That's @OHITSBIGRON. ohitsBigRon. If you like this show, check out our sister show, Time Well Spent. Leaving the Theater will be back soon, but until then, I'll be here on the couch.